The glass case sits in a museum in Thirsk, North Yorkshire. Inside it, an oak chair, plain, dark, no carvings, no gold. The kind of thing you'd pass in an antique shop without slowing down. Above it, a laminated sign, 4 words, "Do not sit." A pub owner hung that chair from the ceiling for 30 years. Not as a display, not as a joke. Because his staff kept dying. 2 workers, 1 year. After the second funeral, he stopped letting anyone near it. Then he called a museum. Not because he believed in curses, because he was afraid of the liability. That is where this story begins. Not with the supernatural. With a rational man making a practical decision about an oak chair. Somewhere in London, inside a vault at the Natural History Museum,
secured within the nested layers of wood and
sits
archival
sealed
cardboard.
inside 7 nested boxes.
Handling precautions are
The
stringent.
scientist who locked it there left a handwritten letter. The last line reads, "My advice is to throw it into the sea." The museum received the stone in 1943. It is still there. The letter is still there. Nobody threw it into the sea. In the Italian Alps, the frozen body of a man dead for 5,000 years lies behind museum glass in Bolzano. At least 7 of the researchers who handled him in the first decade after his discovery are documented dead, in car crashes from sudden illness, in accidents that carry no common logic except proximity. Scientists call this coincidence. They note that hundreds of others worked on the same body and lived. But they also note, quietly, that the 7 who died were the ones with direct physical contact. These are not folklore. They are not Halloween copy. They are documented cases, real names, real institutions, real dates, real decisions
of these
made by
independent
real
records,
people who were
the
not
case,
superstitious,
the box, and the archive,
and still chose to put the
establishes a
objects
clear
under lock and
chronological
key
fact
rather
set.
than destroy them. That is the only question this video is actually asking. Not, are these objects cursed? But, why does the rational response, every single time, look exactly like fear? 10 objects, 10 documented chains of events, and one answer that nobody, not the scientists, not the curators, not the skeptics, has been able to close cleanly. The chair is still in the museum. The stone is still in the vault. The box is still locked. They kept them anyway. Every object in this video had a life before the deaths. That is the part the stories skip. The chair stood in a pub for years before anyone thought to count the bodies. The stone sat in a drawing room in Victorian London, handled by polite guests at dinner parties, before its owner started sealing it inside boxes. The box sat on a shelf in a Polish woman's home for decades. Unopened, unremarkable, just a small wooden cabinet the size of a wine crate. Her family didn't know what was inside. They assumed it was storage. This is how these stories actually begin. Not with a curse, with ordinary furniture in ordinary rooms. The pub in Thirlby was called the Busby Stoop Inn, a roadside stop in North Yorkshire, the kind of place locals came to after work and travelers stopped at to eat. The chair near the fireplace was just a chair. Thomas Busby had been hanged in 1702 at the crossroads nearby. A murderer, a man with a violent history. But that was ancient local gossip, not a live concern. By the 20th century, it was a pub curiosity. RAF servicemen stationed nearby during the Second World War sat in it on dares. It was a game, something to laugh about on a slow evening. The deaths came later,
Well,
and
that's
they
a
came
right
slowly
laugh, innit?
enough that no single one of them looked like a pattern.
I'll tell
That
you
is the
what.
second thing the stories skip, how long it takes for a chain to become visible. In 1857, a British colonel named W. Ferris walked out of India carrying a purple stone. The subcontinent was an open revolt, the Sepoy Mutiny, the bloodiest rupture in the history of British colonial rule. Thousands dead, cities burned, entire regiments destroyed. In that context, one officer pocketing a gemstone from a looted temple was not remarkable. It was practically standard. Ferris brought the stone home, placed it among his possessions, and lived his life. His son inherited it. His son's friends borrowed it. It passed through hands the way inherited objects do, without ceremony, without warning, without documentation. Nobody was keeping a ledger of what happened to the people who touched it. Nobody does
I found this
until
in the
pattern
garden.
forces them to. The world before the
It's
curse
smaller
is
than I
always the
remember.
same world.
Yes,
Order,
it's just a pebble.
explicable, populated by people who have reasonable explanations for every misfortune and no particular reason to connect one death to a stone, a chair, a box, or a frozen body in the Alps. the pattern only becomes visible in retrospect. And retrospect, in every one of these cases, is where the rational explanations start to bend. The first death is never the moment anyone notices. The second death is when someone gets quiet. The third is when someone picks up a pen. Thomas Busby was hanged 2 miles from his own pub. Local record, 1702. Execution at the crossroads. Body gibbeted as a public warning. Before they took him, Busby allegedly placed a curse on the chair where he had eaten his last meal, that anyone who sat in it would die before their time. The magistrate who recorded the execution did not record the curse. Why would he? A condemned man cursing furniture was not a legal matter.
I saw
theater,
him.
but the chair
Just
stayed in
there,
the pub.
by
And
the
the
river.
RAF men
He's
who sat
coming
in
back
it on
for all
dares
of
during the
us.
1940s. 2 of them died in road accidents within weeks. Not documented by the Crown, documented by the landlord, in the way landlords document things, by remembering and by telling the next person who reached for the chair. The first written warning on record for the Delhi Purple Sapphire is more deliberate. Edward Heron Allen was not a superstitious man. He was a scientist, a fellow of the Royal Society, a violinist, a Persian scholar. He received the stone as a gift, and by his own account in a letter now held at the Natural History Museum, experienced immediate and compounding misfortune. He gave it away
Keep
twice.
the stone
Both
hidden.
recipients returned it, unsolicited, within months. He eventually sealed it inside 7 boxes, wrapped it in protective charms from multiple traditions, covering his epistemological bases, perhaps, and deposited it with the museum. His letter was precise and unambiguous. It is trebly accursed and is stained with the blood and the dishonor of everyone who has ever owned it. He was not a man given to that kind of language, which is exactly what makes the letter strange. The Ötzi case has no letter. It has a list. Rainer Helzel, the forensic technician who placed the Iceman's body into a bag with his bare hands in September 1991, died in a car accident 4 months later, en route to deliver a lecture about the discovery. Rainer Helzel was 47. The filmmaker Kurt Weill, who documented the recovery on location, died of a brain tumor 8 months after his footage was broadcast. Professor Conrad Spindler, who led the identification and declared the find the most significant archaeological discovery of the century, died in 2005 of complications from multiple sclerosis, but within 15 years of first contact. None of these deaths are mysterious in isolation. Each one has a cause. Each cause is banal. It is only when you put the names in a column with the dates beside them that the column starts to feel like something else. This is the mechanism in every case in this video. Not a single dramatic event, but a sequence. Unremarkable at first, rational at each step. And then, at some point, for some person, the sequence becomes impossible to keep rationalizing. That is the moment someone picks up a pen. That is when the record starts. At some point, the deaths stop being a private matter. That is the shift. One landlord keeping a chair off the floor is a local story. A colonial museum receiving a stone with a warning letter is an institutional footnote. But when the pattern repeats across centuries, across continents, across people who never met and had no common thread except proximity to a single object, it stops being a footnote. It becomes a question that institutions have to answer publicly. And institutions, almost without exception, answer it the same way, by keeping the object and saying
Notice
nothing
the chair,
definitive.
the warning, the
Lord
records from
Carnarvon died
centuries
in
and places
Cairo
apart.
on April 5th,
They share nothing else,
1923,
yet
5
now we see
months
the
after
pattern.
Howard Carter unsealed the tomb of Tutankhamun for the first time in 3,000 years. The cause was blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite. Mundane. Explicable. But the newspapers did not lead with mosquitoes. They led with the inscription that Carter's team had allegedly found above the burial chamber. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. Carter himself later
The
stated
reports
that no
differ.
such inscription
One
existed.
speaks of a common
He was
ailment.
precise about
The
it
other
and
promises a
credible.
reckoning.
He had cataloged
Which shall
every
we
surface in
believe?
that tomb.
The
But by the time his
sensation,
correction reached the public,
swift
the story
wings,
had already outrun
death,
him. It
and
was
the
in
truth we
40
shall
countries.
make.
It was on the front page in London, New York, Paris. The correction ran in the back. That is how escalation works. The event moves at one speed. The fear moves
The facts
faster.
are here.
Of the 26 people present
But
at the
the myth?
official opening of the
It's
tomb,
already everywhere.
6 were dead within a decade.
They won't listen.
The Egyptologist Arthur Mace, who helped Carter clear the antechamber, collapsed with exhaustion shortly after and never recovered. George J. Gould, an American financier who visited the tomb privately, developed pneumonia and died within months. The radiologist Archibald Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died suddenly on the voyage home. Scientists later proposed that sealed ancient chambers can harbor toxic mold, fungal spores, or concentrated ammonia from millennia of organic decomposition, a legitimate hypothesis. Aspergillus niger has been found in other Egyptian tombs. It is possible. It is plausible.
Is a moment etched
but
in history.
Howard Carter, who spent more time inside that tomb than any other human being alive, died in 1939, 17 years after the opening of lymphoma, natural causes, old age by the standards of his era. If there was a biological agent, it chose selectively.
The microimages show the structure of Aspergillus niger.
The Hope Diamond's chain of owners does not require speculation. It is a ledger. Louis XIV acquired it. He died of gangrene. Louis XVI received it through the French crown. Guillotined,
Notice the timing of Carter's
1793.
death compared
Marie
to the
Antoinette
others.
wore it regularly. Guillotined, same year.
complicates the
The Hope
model.
family, who gave the
The Hope
diamond its
diamond.
name, lost
No
their
longer a
entire
matter of
fortune within
archaeology,
2
but of
generations.
A history
Evelyn
told
Walsh
through its
McLean,
hands,
the
not its
last private
location.
owner, lost her son in a car accident, her daughter to a drug overdose, and her newspaper empire to bankruptcy. She wore the diamond to parties. She called it her lucky charm. She was not stupid. She was not naive. She was a woman who had decided, consciously, that the ledger
The Hope
did not
family
apply
tree
to
begins
her.
here. Tracing
It is
two
the same
generations, a
decision
prolonged
every
chain
owner
of
made.
financial collapse
This
becomes
is the part
clear.
that does not,
Not
fit
sudden,
neatly
but
into
a slow
psychology
erosion
or
of wealth.
statistics. Not that people suffered near these objects, but that people knew the history and reached for them anyway. The escalation is never just the deaths.
The news from
It is the
overseas is quite
persistence of the
interesting,
reaching.
isn't it?
Every object
Indeed.
in this video
What
has
do you
a
make of
rational
it?
explanation available.
Difficult to say at
The
present.
chair, confirmation bias, local legend amplified by retelling. The stone, anxiety projection from a man under personal stress. The Iceman, statistical coincidence across a large research cohort. The tomb, fungal contamination in a sealed anaerobic chamber. The diamond, survivorship bias applied to powerful people whose lives were always high stakes. These
pub
explanations are not
photographs
wrong.
compared to the
They are
museum
genuinely
lighting.
plausible.
Observe
In
the
some
recurrence
cases,
of the local
they are
legend.
probably correct.
Confirmation bias
The problem is
aligns
what
with the
happens
museum.
when you follow them to the end. The Pompeii artifacts are where the rational explanation breaks open most visibly. The National Archaeological Museum in Naples and the Pompeii Site Authority receive approximately 100 packages per year from people returning stolen fragments, roof tiles, mosaic chips, amphora shards, small stones. Inside each package, a letter. The letters describe what happened after the theft, cancer diagnoses, divorces, business failures, deaths of children. One Canadian man returned pieces of an amphora in 2020 after 15 years, having received 3 separate oncological diagnoses in that period. His letter ran to 4 pages. Psychologists call this curse attribution, a well-documented cognitive pattern in which a person who has committed a transgression unconsciously connects subsequent misfortune to the original act as a
Curse
form
attribution,
of self-punishment.
a short, sober
It is
explanation
real.
of guilt
It is
linkage,
measurable.
self-punishment,
It
and the
explains a
cognitive habit of
significant
connecting
portion
later
of these
suffering to an
letters.
earlier wrongful
But
act.
100 letters per
The
year
theory
is
is
not a
simple.
psychological
The
curiosity.
evidence, however,
It is a
not.
volume that forced the museum to
just
create
keeps
a
coming
dedicated storage
and
category
coming.
for returned objects. The rational explanation scaled into an administrative problem. The Silvianus ring goes further. It removes psychology entirely. In the 4th century AD, a Roman man named Silvianus lost a gold ring. He went to the Temple of Nodens, a healing deity worshipped in the Roman British tradition, and inscribed a lead curse tablet. The text survives, excavated at
The
Lydney
thief
Park
who
in
stole my
Gloucestershire
cloak,
in
may
1929.
his health fail him until
Among
it
those
is
who bear the
returned.
name Senitianus,
I vow it to
none
Mercury.
grant health
The lead
until
curse
he bring
tablet,
back
the
the
text
ring
is visible
to the
now.
Temple of
A name,
Nodens.
a plea.
The ring
This is the
itself
first
was found
readable
separately,
recovery.
Lydney Park in
80 miles
1929.
away at
Primary
Silchester,
proof.
bearing the name Senixianus, with a Christian Chi Rho symbol scratched over it, as though someone had tried to overwrite one protection with another.
The Silvianus
Two
ring, a
objects,
tale told
two
not by
locations,
witnesses, but by 2
one
pieces of
transaction
material
between
evidence
them,
separated
a theft,
by 80 miles and a
reconstructed
trail of
entirely
gold.
from physical evidence without a single witness account. The curse tablet was read by J.R.R. Tolkien, who was commissioned to write a linguistic note on the name Nodens for the excavation report. Whether that tablet fed into the mythology of a ring that could not be willingly surrendered is speculative. Tolkien never confirmed it directly, but he studied that inscription in 1929. The Lord of the Rings began taking shape in the early 1930s. That is not evidence of anything. It is the kind of detail that refuses to stay quiet. Here is what makes all 5 of these cases resistant to clean closure. The rational explanations require the evidence to be worse than the curse. Fungal contamination in the tomb means the Egyptian government opened a biohazard to tourists for decades. Curse attribution at Pompeii means the guilt of theft produces measurable physical illness at scale. The Sylvianus tablet means a private legal dispute from 1,600 years ago left physical traces in 2 counties that only became legible when placed side by side in a museum archive.
Okay.
The supernatural version is frightening.
Matches perfectly.
The rational version
Found the
is
listing.
Quietly, persistently worse.
And here's the
Dybbuk
box.
box was
Just
listed on
arrived
eBay
this
in
morning.
2003.
Thanks.
The seller
I'll take
was
it
a
off
man
your
named
hands.
Kevin Manis, an antique furniture dealer in Portland, Oregon. He had purchased the box at an estate sale, the belongings of a 103-year-old Polish Jewish woman who had survived the Holocaust, emigrated to the United States, and died.
Grandmother never
with
allowed
almost
anyone
nothing.
to touch it.
Her granddaughter, handling the
need
estate,
to.
handed Manis the box and told him one thing. Her grandmother had never let anyone touch it. She had asked to be buried with it. The granddaughter did not honor that request. She sold it with the furniture. Manis's eBay listing was not a sales pitch. It was a document. He described what happened after he brought the box home. His basement workshop smelled of cat urine and jasmine with no source. His employees reported nightmares. Not similar nightmares, identical ones, featuring the same elderly woman, the same shadow, the same sequence of events. Without comparing notes until weeks later, Manis himself woke repeatedly with bruises he could not account for. He gave the box to his mother as a gift. She suffered a stroke the same day. She communicated afterward using a letterboard, HATEGIFT. He tried to give it away 4 more times. Each recipient returned it, unsolicited, within weeks. The buyers who came after Manis on the public record are not connected to each other by class, geography, profession, or belief system. A museum curator in Missouri, a student in Kansas, a paranormal researcher who eventually had the box encased in a sealed iron cabinet lined with granite and religious inscriptions. Each reported the same
scent of
cluster.
old wood, the scent of a
Respiratory
dream,
illness,
the scent of
eye
illness,
infections,
shadows on the wall,
smell of jasmine,
shadows in
or
your
ammonia
mind.
without a source, and at least one person in the household experiencing the same dream. Skeptics point, correctly, to the eBay listing as a priming mechanism. Once you have read that description, every strange smell and bad dream in your house becomes evidence. This is a legitimate objection. It explains a great deal. It does not explain why Manis's employees shared the same dream before anyone had read anything. The box exists right now. It is not in a museum. It is not under institutional lock. It has passed through at least 6 documented owners since 2003, each transition recorded in blog posts, in interviews, in a published book, and in a 2012 Hollywood film that grossed $46 million on a $3 million budget, which is its own kind of cultural documentation. The woman who asked to be buried with it has been dead for 20 years. The box is still moving. 10 objects, across 10 countries, across 17 centuries. A Roman lead tablet in a Gloucestershire field. A colonial gemstone in 7 nested boxes in a London vault. A frozen body in a glass case in Bolzano, attended by researchers who are quietly, methodically dying. A chair behind a rope in a Yorkshire museum. A diamond in a bulletproof case in Washington, toured by 4 million visitors a year. None of them destroyed, all of them preserved, labeled, cataloged, insured, and placed under controlled lighting for public viewing. The curators are not stupid. The scientists are not naive. The institutions that house these objects employ the most rigorous archival and preservation standards in the world. And still, in every single case, when the option to destroy the object was available, the decision was the same. Keep it, document it, lock it carefully. But keep it. There is no clean conclusion here. The evidence does not close. The rational explanations hold in parts and fracture in others. The deaths are documented. The coincidences are real. The institutional decisions are a matter of public record. What remains, after the science, after the skepticism, after the archives, is one fact that sits at the center of every case in this video and will not move. Every person who ever held these objects knew the history. They reached for them anyway,